Good morning, my name is Simon Haig and I'm the General Manager for Food Service for Southeast Asia, and I'm absolutely delighted and privileged to be here to bring together both our retail and our food service channels for this special session. KHNI has a really special place enabling us to drive nutrition and understanding in the food industry, something that we have to look at seriously. Sustainable nutrition is the future and we need to act now. So I have amazing panel here with us this morning, and I'd like to welcome them onto the stage. So if you would like to join me, that would be great. So we're going to do an introduction. I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we're going to go through the top 10 trends that we talked about from the KHNI Institute to celebrate their 10th birthday. We're going to be joined on screen by consumers from the industry, from real life here in Singapore, to talk about some of the trends. So before I start in the questions, I'd like you all to introduce yourselves and we'll go over from this side. So Aoife, if you'd like to start for me.
Can you hear? Does this mic work?
Yes.
My name's Aoife Marie Murphy and I'm Sustainable Nutrition Manager for Kerry globally. And I also lead the Kerry Health Nutrition Institute with my colleague Brian, who's down the back. And I'm really excited to be here to have this great session with you all where we're talking about some of the key trends around sustainable nutrition.
I'm okay. Hi everybody, my name is Dennis Scott, the Group CEO of Kerry. Kerry is a 50-year-old company. I've been with the company for almost 30 years. So I've pretty much grown up with the organization. I have been the CEO of Kerry for the last 7 years. So part of this KHNI journey as both CEO and as my role as the CEO of the APMEA region based here in Singapore from 2014 to 2017. So delighted to be back here in Singapore. Thank you for organizing this, Simon and the entire team. And looking forward to the session.
Yeah, wicked. Hello, everybody. I'm Oliver. I'm a chef and I guess now a food consultant to a certain degree. But that's a recent development for me. So, but my focus in my career has always been sustainability. Nutrition has come along much more recently, actually, but in the past few years with a focus on nutrition as well. But for 15 years in the food industry, working primarily with products that are trying to improve the world or at least do the least damage possible as an industry. So I'm sort of where the product meets the road, so to speak.
Hi everyone, I'm Angelia. I'm a futurist, and my job really is about kind of spotting patterns before they become obvious. And to do that, I really work on the edges of technology and new disruption that's happening in the marketplace. I work really predominantly to kind of create an X-type growth curve. So that's with new venture creation and helping businesses kind of prepare for what the consumer wants in the future.
I'm Kalpana, and I think I don't want to go through where I am. You can see that. But actually, I always believe in nutrition. That's why I even did not want to do a medical degree and I chose nutrition. And to date, I believe that each and every one of us this sustainable nutrition is something we should take it to our heart and we must do it.
Thanks, Kalpana, and thanks to the panel. So those of you that know me as a commercial person, but I am actually also a nutritionist, and my degree is in food nutrition. This is an area of passion I have. It's great that you're all here, and it's brilliant to have the KHNI Institute back so quickly, and to celebrate the 10th anniversary from our Malaysia event last October. So we're going to get into the conversation and start with our first section, which is the trend of accessible nutrition. So the United Nations Sustainability Goal number 2 is to end hunger. It's a fundamental function of humans to enable us to eat. And the food system we have needs to support our future. Consumers are wanting more nutrition from their products. We have lower yields. Cocoa, for instance, has just got to the highest price ever for the last 50 years. You have issues on orange crops. This is a piece where we need to get access. In addition to access to food, we also have the fact that we throw away 30% of what we produce as a food industry. So it's not just access to food, it's also how do we reduce food waste. So before we get into the questions for the panel, I'm going to introduce Zafrina to talk about her views. She's a consumer from Singapore.
Here in Southeast Asia, we understand how vital, accessible and affordable nutrition is to our daily lives. Being able to easily get healthy, affordable food that supports my well-being. Our region actually offers an abundance of fresh, nutritious food options, from tropical fruits to leafy greens and seafood available in our local markets. However, rising living costs and economic challenges are making it increasingly difficult for many families to eat healthy all the time. Prices and availability are factors for me. Sometimes it's harder to find or more expensive, but I try to make it a priority where and when I can. Locally grown and sustainably produced foods are also better for the environment, and I like supporting local. Nutritious, affordable food, should be a basic right, not a luxury.
So thanks to Zafrina. And one of the stats that kind of scares me is 75% of our food consumed comes from 12 plants and 5 animals. I think about that for a second. So Oliver, question for you, I guess. So what steps are chefs and food service professionals taking to expand that kind of food available space?
Yeah, just hit us with the blunt force trauma statistics right before my question. Food diversity is a major challenge. I think in really heavily scaled enterprises, it can be a fundamentally difficult thing. I think that's for obvious reasons, just logistically. But within the marketplace, I think there's an increasing appetite for a more diverse plate in general. Those stats actually get even worse the smaller you go, because I think in plants alone, I think it's like 65% out of 5 plants. So the vast majority of our diet comes from a few things, and there's more than just nutritional issues with that. Obviously, okay, that's gone. I'm loud enough. It's okay. Then more than just nutritional issues with this. From an environmental standpoint, a single disease can wipe out 1/5 of your food supply. From a personal standpoint, you just don't have as interesting a diet as pets people used to. I think they pulled a guy out of a bog in Normandy. It's one of the most well-preserved bodies in the world, and he had over 200 different foods in his stomach. So, I think there's a real call for it. I don't see the industry responding yet, but I think he will. And particularly areas that are super biodiverse, like Southeast Asia. Island like Borneo or Sarawak or Sabah has the second highest biodiversity in the entire world, competing for the highest, depending on which sort of science you ask. But there's a real opportunity for Southeast Asia and food diversity as well, to just be introducing people to new products that are highly nutritious and can sort of help to sort this area of, when cocoa goes down, what are we going to eat? Maybe there's chocolate that comes from a different source. Does that answer the question?
Perfect. And Kalpana, I'll come over to you. So also within the food accessible place, we talk about non-communicable diseases. So how can we address the rising prevalence of non-communicable diseases like diabetes in Southeast Asia, one of your specialist areas? So over to you.
So when you look at diabetes, I don't think we need a special diet. So for anything, 3 A's: affordability, accessibility, and adequacy. Actually, affordability, okay, we talk about maybe socioeconomic factors and so on, but you also can create nutritious meals which are within the budget. So affordability is how do we educate the consumers? How do you work with the local authorities to make sure this is a part of the guideline? Okay, so that can be done. Then when you look at availability, now actually food is available throughout the year. But again, I think the previous thing we saw the consumer talking about is she may not be able to get it. So this again where sustainable nutrition comes in. Then the last bit, which is the adequacy, which is the nutrition adequacy, because mostly non-communicable diseases, especially for diabetes, I tell a person, cut down your rice. Okay, people only think of carbs, but when I cut down rice or carbs, I'm also removing certain micronutrients. So that is where nutrition adequacy comes in. And with aging population, they will not be having enough appetites. So the quantity becomes smaller. So my main take is how do we educate them to choose nutritiously adequate foods, especially talking about energy density lower, increasing the nutrient density. this is something we should give importance to in non-communicable diseases. And the two things which has to be cut down in non-communicable diseases is sugar and salt. Okay, both when you cut down, of course, we are again targeting sustainable nutrition.
Thank you. And we'll come on to sodium reduction later. It's another one of our pillars, so that's a great segue. But you also mentioned something that was really important around affordability. So Angelia, if I come over to you, so what foresight do you have around affordability and accessibility, and how do they interact?
Yeah, I think as a foresight strategist, right, I really try to take the bigger picture in terms of breaking down what accessibility and affordability means. I think for Southeast Asia, affordability is really at the forefront of our minds. We're looking at prices a lot. And then I take a look at prices and see what kind of macro forces are really disrupting the prices, causing them to go up and causing them to go down. In Southeast Asia, what's really interesting is we're connecting that to sustainability. So some of the taxes and regulation and report requirements are actually going to be pushing prices up. So we have a real sense of we need to take a good look at how we can adjust those prices based on the locality of where our food is coming from, which comes back to accessibility. So in the short, I think in the future, whatever your economic range, you are going to be eating closer to home. What that means is that you're going to be eating more diverse foods, but that diversity is going to come from the land that it's available. So you are going to eat, for example, in Singapore, we can grow cucumbers really well. That's going to be available to you in terms of accessibility. And that diversity will come from what that land and the soil quality can provide. So there's a real complex system here as we think about kind of how we build up accessibility. The other thing I'm thinking about is as we bring the food sources closer to us, we're also going to tap into the social media influencers. We've all seen this live streaming that's happening, and it really cuts the middleman. So in business, we know that when you cut out the middleman and you cut out the supply chain and you make it shorter, your prices, you really get a good cap on your expenses, and you can adjust your prices from there. And the social media and the internet can be real enablers of that price reduction, because you can go from the source and a shorter supply chain to the consumer. Now, I want to think about this also as kind of, in the end, what's going to be happening, one of the key factors for accessibility and affordability is proximity to source. I've talked about physical proximity, but I also want to talk about mental proximity, because the consumer will be thinking more about their food choices, not just in what nutrition they get, but also the carbon credits that they can afford, right? So one of the scenarios I have is a person who looks at a steak, wants a steak, craving a steak, but then checks their carbon credits and say, not today, I've got to wait a month before I can eat another steak. Because there's a price that we now understand that is an economic price, but then there's an environmental price that we'll start to take as well. And so I think that's really kind of what we see as the future of accessibility. The last point I wanted to make is, the UN actually has a great indicator for Southeast Asia with accessibility, and it's called shared prosperity. And so we're looking at that food chain, and we're seeing how consumers are being more aware of how prosperity is distributed across that food chain. So understanding who my farmer is, understanding the alliances with the farmers that influence what I eat is going to be very much part of the consumer mindset.
Thanks, Angelia. And prosperity is also really apt as we're coming up to Chinese New Year this week.
Absolutely.
And we talked about accessibility and affordability. Like we talk about the KHNI bringing the voice of science to difficult questions. So Aoife, how are we going to use innovation and science to help fix some of these fundamental questions?
Yeah, look, if we think about rising food prices, why is that the case? It's climate change, it's crop diseases, that's causing, a lot of our food to increase in terms of the cost. So when we think about innovation, we have to think about that supply chain along at different points. So at one point, it's, the growing of those crops. So we need innovation around regenerative agriculture to prevent, so that the soil is really healthy, so that the crops will maintain or withstand these disease pressures. Secondly, if we think about product development, Simon, you mentioned that the price of cocoa has reached the highest rate that it has ever been. It's increased 300% in 2014 due to a shoot disease within the cocoa crop. So it's about looking at innovations around, cocoa replacers, make sure that we can still give the great taste of the products that consumers want without them having to pay way above the normal price that they're used to paying. And then finally, at the end of the supply chain, we're thinking about that food waste. You mentioned that 1/3 of food is wasted. That goes completely against what we would say around accessible and affordable nutrition. Why are we throwing all of this food away? So innovation around food waste reduction, making sure that the food that we do produce and have available is eaten and those nutrients are nourishing the population. So they're the different areas of innovation that's ongoing. And it's a really exciting time.
Thanks, Eva. And Edmund, you lead one of the top 10 food ingredient companies in the world. So what role do we have as a food industry to help people have better access to food?
I think I'd say our position in the industry is quite important in that we connect, in many cases, the primary producer to ultimately the manufacturer of packaged food. And let me start by saying we should be doing everything we possibly can to encourage people to eat more whole foods, more vegetables, more fruits. But in terms of packaged food, I guess there's probably five areas whereby, our sense of it is that it's a combination of those 5 things that need to kind of come together, and perhaps there's some compromises that have to be made to really try to bring food that's affordable and accessible to a mass market. So the first thing is convenience. I think what we're seeing, what we're learning is that people, generally speaking, especially in recent times, are prepared to compromise on a lot of things, but convenience is not one. Everybody's busier. There's just demographic things happening that I think that convenience is just something that we're not prepared to compromise too much on anymore. We put a lot of value on our time, so that has to be brought into the equation in terms of types of products we're developing and creating. Second thing is the world over, people want to feel better about the food they're consuming. There's huge runway here. I mean, the level of sugar, salt, and fat in products, in packaged food products, is significantly too high. There is significant room there to reduce the amount of sugar, salt, and let's stick with sugar and salt in packaged food products. And the world over, consumers understand it, to an extent. They want to learn about it, but they just want to. They trust the system that if the food is in a product that is good, that it is acceptable, and I think we have we really have a responsibility to make sure that that's the case. So the second point is around, let's say, the nutritional quality of products need to be better. The third point is sustainability. Sustainability means different things to different people all over the world. It might be about plastic. It might be about, carbon footprint. It could be really anything. It doesn't really matter whether it's a perfect definition of what sustainability is. It doesn't really matter at all. It just means that, there needs to be a push towards individual products being more sustainable. The next point is affordability. Yes, cocoa prices growing up by 300%. That's not a let's say a cost reality that can be just absorbed into final products. So some solution needs to come up. And the last point then is taste. So we can do a great job in all the four other areas, and if the product doesn't taste good, it doesn't really matter. So across convenience, nutrition, sustainability, cost, and taste, I think it's about making progress as opposed to developing something that's perfect. I think there's going to have to be there has to be compromises, but I think too many times I've seen, let's say, an overemphasis in one area versus another, where maybe all the emphasis is in nutrition. That's not a bad thing. Of course, it's not a bad thing. But in terms of, let's say, to accessible nutrition, to me, if it's not hitting or doesn't have the capability to hit a mass market, that's not accessible nutrition. So how we try to think about it is, how can we enable our customer base? We're a B2B business. We don't have our own brands, but how do we enable our customer base to reach a mass set of consumers with products that have, let's say a right level of balance across those 5 areas. A lot more to be done. But I think, I don't think it's just one thing. I think it's a combination of things, and maybe there's going to have to be some compromises made. But progress shouldn't, or perfection shouldn't stop. The striving for perfection shouldn't stop progress.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for adding a C to my many A's. So it needs to be accessible, adequate, affordable, and convenient. And that's the end of our accessible nutrition pillar. So we're now going to move on to our second trend, which is the aging population. So the silver avalanche is coming to Asia. By 2030, the over 50s will be 32% of the population. If you look at some of the markets in North Asia, Korea is a great one. They now sell more prams for dogs than they do for babies. There is an aging population coming, and we need to change the way we look at things. In Asia Pacific, that group of over 50s will actually be 35% of people, but 52% of expendable income. So not only are they more of them, they will be there spending money in all of our businesses. Asian business needs to respond to this avalanche, changing its nutritional demographic and tailoring its products to the consumers that are coming. So we're now going to hand over to our next consumer, which is Sue Wing.
As you grow older, it's important to maintain our health and well-being. And maintaining good health is important if you want to enjoy quality of life, staying physically and mentally active and taking care of our bodies. Not to age well means more than just eating healthy. It's also about keeping active. That's why I'm going for regular walks and doing light exercise like stretching or yoga, keeping my muscles strong, staying mentally sharp by reading, doing puzzles, and learning new things, and building strong connections with families and friends. When our unique health needs are met, we all have the opportunity to age with dignity and vitality. I think this helps others like me to remain connected to communities, enjoy meaningful relationships, and contribute our valuable experience and wisdom, enriching our future society.
Started on this trend. So what is the key consideration for the aging population when looking at changing the nutritional requirements?
So a stat that I often hear and that I think is quite impactful is that from the age of 30, you're losing muscle mass between 5 and 8% per decade, right? So if we think about the muscle mass that we would have then when we get into our 70s, 80s, that's declining unless we protect it, right? And how we would protect muscle mass is through protein and exercise. So really protein is the key nutrient here for healthy aging. That maintains not just muscle mass for sport, but it's your day-to-day living. It's getting up and out of a chair, getting in and out of bed, walking, playing with your grandchildren. So this is really, really important in terms of a nutritional requirement. But our appetites decrease when we get older. So the ability to sit down and eat, a lot of protein in a meal is an issue. So really having compact, easy to eat, tasty forms of protein is important for this age group. And then another need state would be cognitive health. So that's really important in terms of protecting around consuming omega-3. Fatty acids would be the main one, as well as a whole range of micronutrients. So they would be the key pieces. There are a wide range of other need states like immunity, for example, but the key ones I would say would be protein and cognitive health for sure.
And then Aoife, just to follow on Kalpana, maybe you can help here as the other specialist in this area. Like, if we talk about the nutrition needs of the aging population, is there a specific factors we need to look at when we're developing programs for that age group as well?
So as mentioned, protein is the key, but more than 50% of them are not getting enough protein. So most of our Asian, when you look at the Asian foods, maybe every meal, 70% will be carbs. And most of these are refined carbs. So when we design programs, we need to again look at the same A's will come in, Is this population, are they affordable? And protein calories are expensive. I hope you all agree with me on that. Okay, any protein calorie, whether it's plant protein, animal protein, or futuristic protein, whatever it is expensive. So are we talking about how do they afford? And the other point is, it should also be convenient for them to add in. I know we talk about fortification. Okay, why don't you add 1 scoop of protein into your porridge? I do home visits, help elderly, but I don't see that happening in their homes, right? So we only target a specific segment of the population. So is it affordable to all? So that's the reason when we design community nutrition programs, we have to make it, is it also sustainable? I'm telling sustainable in a long way, not just when the program is run for 3 weeks. Do we really evaluate these programs and how do we do that? And in this way, you talk about certain ingredients which can really help you too. These ingredients can be put into products and we can create products that are affordable. And more and more products are coming in the market, and that is where product innovation comes in. And also when you talk about aging, dysphagia comes in. That's where sarcopenic dysphagia. Dysphagia not due to stroke or non-communicable diseases, but just because of your protein deficiency, your swallowing muscles will become dysphagia will come in, sarcopenic dysphagia. This is a very new area which we didn't pay attention to. So because of this, the food should also be texture modified. And when you do modify the texture, then you talk about sensory. Okay, that is where your taste modulations come in. So that's an area maybe I'll allow the rest to talk. Yeah.
That's Kalpana. So we talk about the need for protein being a key ingredient. But I think the one thing that everyone wants to ask, Angelia, is as there's an aging population, are we going to be healthier for longer in the future, or how does that look for us?
Yeah, so the indicators are that we are going to live longer, but the nuance of the situation is quite complex, because we are now talking not just about lifespan, but health span as well. And health span is defined by the length of time from when your health fails to when you pass. And interestingly, even as our lifespans are expanding, our health spans are also kind of decreasing, because that's the years that we really need help and we really need intervention. There's a real knock-on effect, right? There's lots of NPD around kind of how we serve the aging population. And in Asia, right, there's 2 phenomena. One is that Korea, I think, is going to be a super aged society in 8 years, because we're starting to see age, that the third act, we have to divide it up a lot more. So Korea is super aged, but Singapore and Thailand, for example, are rapidly aging societies. By that, I mean France took 157 years to become an aged society. Singapore and Thailand will be about 30 years. So it's very fast coming to us, right? Now, the reality of aging societies, whether super aged or aging, and this is not popular. When I say it, none of you are going to clap for me, is that we're going to have to work longer. We're going to have to work much, much more years, right? And so, yes, we have AI and we have robots and we have drones coming in, and that may help us work longer because they'll take some of that manual labor out. But our cognitive health will be extremely important, right? To Aoife's point, that cognitive health will help us stay in the workforce and also support our longer lifespans. So how we do that through our nutrition, through what we take, will be very, very important. The one thing I really am interested with cognitive health is that it shouldn't be an intervention when you need it. So I see it a little bit more like the anti-aging market in beauty. So in Asia, we know, right, anti-aging as a product was used by people who were 40 and 50 and above. But in Asia, we started to see the 20-year-old girls and ladies use it, because we don't want to have product that helps us when we are already sick. So I start to see cognitive health as a preventative, and it will stretch. This aging this aging opportunity will stretch across ages. It's not just for those who are aged.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And
Except for the part about working.
I'm sorry.
I was so Edmund, it sounds like you talked about being CEO for 7. It sounds like there's another 25 ahead of you. So how do you expect the rapidly expanding environment and this demographic to change the way we work or what we need to do in the complex future?
Yeah, I think I'm going to sound really unpopular, but my comments are probably more orientated towards Europe because that's where I'm based. So and obviously as an organization with 20,000 people, this is a reality, and because of the type of organization we're in, but this is relevant to any organization. But just to talk about Kerry for a second, it's highly technical, highly scientific, and a lot of individuals with with many decades of expertise built up in the industry. So when many countries have retirement ages around in the mid-60s. I mean, different countries have let's say retirement ages somewhere between 62 and 66 or 67. And the reality is in the vast majority of cases, people are still quite healthy, energetic. They want to work longer. Now, they mightn't want to work 5 days a week or 6 days a week or 7 days a week. That's a different story. But I think what we have been doing is just trying to have that conversation, not at the very last minute, not at the 11:59 the day before they're supposed to be retiring.
So thank you for taking Angelia's have to work to want to work longer. And we heard about protein being the key, but Oliver, we talk about the increase of protein, we talk about the increase of nutrition requirements. Is there any rules or techniques that we use in food from a chef skill perspective to increase the nutritional amount in food? And obviously we also talked about older generations wanting to eat less or more often and appetite being not as common. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I always think about food as the most prevalent source of preventative medicine in the world. So it's the only, really fundamentally, it's the one that you get exposed to every single day. So whether the population is already aged or whether they're slightly younger, I think it's a relevant discussion to have around nutrition and food sources and exactly what you're getting. Ultimately, it's going to delay the onset of certain aging issues. And then from a chef's perspective, when you're feeding an aging population, the thing is, it's largely on a case-by-case basis what people actually need. There's no okay, so if you have a table of 5 people over 70, they're not going to have the same issues, one to the other. So there'll be uric acid buildup or problems with swallowing, or there'll be digestibility or blood sugar issues or whatever it might be. And fundamentally, from a chef's perspective, understanding a little bit about these conditions and what they are, and then being able to appropriately flex in a direction. Hopefully they're considerate enough to give a bit of advance notice. It's always my bugbear with people coming in with special stuff. But in general, I think it's really, as a chef, if you're meant to be a person of skill, right? A chef needs to learn about these things. So people with different conditions and different abilities to eat or consume certain things, there's a lot of chefs who just go no, stay out of my restaurant. And I think really that's an inappropriate way to approach hospitality. I would love to see more tailored solutions, and we might get to this later, but and then to go with that, there's more diversity of ingredient that can help people in different ways. So there's certain foods that we don't consume very often that are very high in certain aspects that can help people in an aging population, that I'd love to see come more into the conversation as well. So technically, I think you're ultimately just trying to cook for a high nutritional profile and protein density, but fundamentally what that involves for different people in different situations is a lot more broad, and it's actually exciting and engaging for the right sort of mindset of chefs. So
Thanks, Oliver. So we talked about the hospitality industry being more hospitable. to individual requirements. We talked about protein being a key. We talk about people wanting to work for longer, not having to.
Can I add one more thing? Sorry, I think you mentioned regenerative farming in your opening comment, and I do feel like this is something that underpins the entirety of all of these conversations that probably deserves a point of spotlight. Is that like we are facing up to the lowest nutritional density in the foods that we are eating in human history. We are facing up to massive climate issues. And a lot of these things fall back to how we grow and produce the food. So ultimately, even for nutrition, even for aging, if you're looking at fundamental solutions, like the most concise solution is to support regenerative farms. I just think that that's an important point to underpin everything that's going to happen in the future. Climate crisis, aging populations, everything is going to be ultimately supporting the right producers of food in the first place. Because I think that gets glossed over with, convenient mechanisms for capital expenditure and technology and stuff like that. But really, we need to change the way we farm towards a more sustainable solution, and that would improve everything we're going to talk about today. So, yeah.
So thank you for adding the point I was hoping for. Okay. Soil quality is also reducing the amount of micronutrients and vitamins in our food year by year. So whether it's regenerative farming or top-ups, adding back nutrition is going to be even more important as we move forward. So that's the end of our second trend, and we're going to move on to our next one, which is women's health. I can't believe it's the third trend of the day. Half the world, 50% of the world are women. And for those of you that haven't realized it yet, all of us come from a woman at some point in our life. They're integral to our world and our planet, and have distinct health needs through their life stages. So tailored strategies in women's health are unlocking a future where every woman thrives at every single life. And women's health does have specific requirements through their life stages. So the reproductive age, pregnancy, lactation, pre-menopause, post-menopause, and menopause itself. So looking at those life stages is important on how we build food products, but also how we look at tailored nutritional requirements. So let's hear from Rena, one of the consumers on this platform.
As a mother, staying healthy and eating well is important. Not just for ourselves, but for our families as we juggle so many roles. But with our busy family lives and careers as caregivers or working moms, it's often easy to put ourselves last, unfortunately, when there are so many responsibilities. So for me, being able to afford nutritious food and knowing how to prepare balanced meals for myself and my family is important, especially during life stages like maybe pregnancy, breastfeeding, and at the later part, perhaps menopause. I think we need to talk more about women's health issues, be it hormone changes, mastitis from breastfeeding, which can be really painful, or even bone health. So to me, I find that these issues are often overlooked or they come with stigma attached to it. So perhaps talking more openly about these topics not only help women feel less alone, but encourages us to go for early intervention, better care. So when we put our health first and advocate for better resources and education, we are actually setting, a good example for our families, perhaps even empowering the next generation of women and their families to also value health and wellness.
Thanks, Rena. Maybe Aoife, come over to you first. So can you give us some examples where the nutritional needs of women are different to men?
Perfect. So look, when we think about women compared to men, there's a lot of different life stages. So man, it's literally adolescence, adulthood, and then aging. Whereas for women, there's lots of different nuances in there. There's the introduction of the menstrual cycle, there's pregnancy, there's lactation, there's fertility, there's menopause, there's premenopause, postmenopause. So there's lots of different areas where hormones are fluctuating within a female body, and that requires specific nutritional requirements. So for example, a teenage girl, she will require a lot of calcium in her diet at that point in her life to build bone health. And her bones are majority built by the time she's like 20, 21. So really her nutrition at that stage in life is impacting how she will be when she's 70, 80, 90 years old. So it's really fundamental at that point. And bone health is a really key piece for females as well because of our estrogen levels. That really affects your bone density and bone health. So it's really important to think about it like that. But when we think about the nutritional requirements during pregnancy and lactation, they're really, really important because you're not only supporting your own health, but the health of a newborn as well. So there are key things there that we need to consider. Calcium, again, is one, but there's lots of different areas. Protein, making sure you get omega-3s to support the growth. So there's lots of different areas. And then in terms of menopause as well, that's an area where a lot of, I suppose 80% of women going through menopause will experience some sort of symptom. That could be like hot flushes, mood swings, memory loss. And nutrition and diet can really help to support those symptoms. So it's important that we educate women about the different dietary impacts that we can do. So, things like plant-based inositol, they can support, or phytoestrogens from the likes of soy that can help with some of the symptoms. So it's really, we can look at women's health from different life stages and target from a nutritional point of view different products along the way. And maybe Kalpana, you can add to some of the piece from a Southeast Asian perspective.
Maybe one of the key points in Southeast Asia, like adolescents as well as women face is anemia.
Yeah.
In fact, anemia is very rampant. We don't see that in Singapore because, we are a very well-developed country. But when you look at our neighboring countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, anemia is a major issue. So they talk about how do you fortify iron into some of the commonly eaten foods. So in the case of China, what they did was they tried to fortify iron into sauces, because without sauce, there is no cooking. So this is some of the strategies they use. So anemia is something which is really ignored. Unless they go and do a test, they don't know their hemoglobin levels are low. And the other thing you rightly pointed out is calcium. So calcium is like your bank account. If you don't try to deposit more calcium until 30 for women, after that, your plateau, like it just drops. So you cannot do any more. So try to deposit more so that your bones are stronger. And again, Asians, we are more osteoporotic, and not just women, in fact, men as well. But now we are talking about women's health. So these are the two key issues, yeah. And of course, about menopause you mentioned as well.
Thanks, Kalpana. Angelia, what do you foresee as the changing space of women's needs, tie in the last trend as well, aging population, in terms of benefits that we can see for Southeast Asia if we start to do some changes?
Yeah, so Southeast Asia is really interesting. Can you guess, like there's a new technology is really helping with women's health, and it's a global phenomenon, right? So we're looking at femtech. In Southeast Asia, can you guess how many women are actually using femtech? Do you think it's above 20%, 30%? Maybe 90%? It's actually 60%. It's a tough question. Only I can answer it because I Googled it. But 60% of Southeast Asian women are already on the femtech wagon. And that's really interesting because when you look at their education, they've really been heavily educated in the menstrual health and STIs. But everything in between is their learning online, right? So there's a great sense in Southeast Asia that when we support women with technology and with new nutrition, there's going to be a lot of opportunity. And how I see this is the clashing of databases. So we've got women who are tracking their health, who are using sensors in their phones to track their health. That's one database. Then we've got nutrition and flavor as another database. How do we clash the two to create really personalized solutions for the woman? So maybe from a diet perspective, she's always having a coffee at the morning of the day. It's a coffee nonetheless. But that coffee itself changes to what she needs. I think one of the interesting things about women is not just the periods of their life, but looking at menstrual nutrition, right? Because from a menstrual cycle point of view, in those 28 days, there are like 4 or 5 different types of food that you need to eat across the menstrual cycle. So in the luteal phase, for example, then I think that's the phase when progesterone is at the highest. A woman needs more magnesium and calcium. So it's a daily calibration for the women's health. And then to bring it back to Renee's point around women tend to find it a very easy solution, easy to put themselves as the last. And I think then it becomes on all of us, whether you're male, female, or anything in between, to put women first. because they are the source. And if we can feed that source, then we can really, really change the world that way. And I think that's why women's health is so important, and why women's health is not a gendered issue, it's actually a humanitarian issue.
One thing that I do want to go into that people don't talk about and should talk about more often is menopause. So, Kalpana, are there specific programs that you're aware of that support women through menopause, and some good examples that you can share with the audience?
Actually, this is very interesting when you brought about this point is, in fact, many did not even think about menopause. But recently, I think in Singapore context, KK Hospital started looking into it. In 2023, they started the menopause support group. And then through this group, they also had this, what they see something like, there is a Facebook group created as well for that. So you can all go and check it out. And they also have the other thing, which I am very closely connected with this. I'm also with the Association for Patient Organization Singapore. So under that, we have a new alliance form, which is menopause care support group. So they have also just come on board. But only problem here is with all this, I feel this group should also include men. Otherwise, only women are just talking about their problems. Okay, because the family support should be there. And also, I was also thinking, does my son know about it? How about the family? Because when a woman is so grumpy and all that, so everyone hates her. But actually, it's when a family support comes through, that is why these menopause support groups should also involve the entire family. So check it out. I think Singapore, we have made great, at least 2023, 24, we are really into it. So that is something great, but I have not checked about in the Southeast Asia, still the awareness is very, very low. Many don't know about it. In fact, all the spouses should be educated about menopause.
I think that's a really good point, Kalpana, and it might reduce the stigma around women's health. And I know our consumer mentioned about the stigma as well, and particularly around, certain areas like when you're pregnant or breastfeeding and the issue of mastitis. So just wanted to touch upon that because it's a really important issue in terms of if a woman develops mastitis when she's breastfeeding, that's the number one reason why she'll stop breastfeeding.
Yep.
And then the infant will suffer because of that. And it's actually really easy to prevent the mastitis through, there are preventative measures that you can take through diet and through the probiotic supplementation. There's a lot of great evidence around that. Up until maybe 10 or 20 years ago, most of the research around mastitis was done in cows. But, and that was a pity that there hasn't been a lot of research in females, but that is developing now. There's a lot more happening. And we're seeing a lot of great results around, preventative measures around probiotics in that space. So it's a cool area in terms of new research and innovation. Yeah.
And also to touch base on that, for Raffles Hospital in Singapore, they also have this menopause support group using TCM. This is something just recently started. So how TCM can be used to support the symptoms of menopause. I thought something great. You're not just Western, and we're also focusing on alternative medicine, which is something good initiative started. Yeah.
So that brings us to the end of the women's health pillar. If you want any more information on this, there's some really great assets on the KHNI website. And I'm really happy that we had a chance to talk about menopause, which is so often missed and not talked about. So we'll move on to trend number 4, which is sodium reduction. Sodium reduction, the stats are kind of scary, so I'm reading them so I don't get them wrong. So according to WHO, most countries globally exceed the recommended limit of 5 grams of salt per day, and an estimated 1.89 million diet-related deaths each year are associated with excessive salt consumption. And it's a contribution that is increasing the amount of people who are passing away because of sodium. It's a high indicator and high connection to cardiovascular disease. And we think by 2030, it could save about 7 million people's lives a year just by reducing salt consumption. So sodium is a big hot topic. And when we came together as a panel, it's the one that started the most amount of conversation. But before I go to the panel, let's hear from Sharon, the consumer, on her perspectives.
Maintaining good health is about making smart choice. One area we often talk about is our sodium intake. I know that too much salt in food can lead to high blood pressure and heart disease. But at the same time, I also know that salt makes foods taste so much delicious. It is almost like salt brings out the best in other ingredients, making meal more satisfying and enjoyable. Cutting back on salt isn't easy, especially when we are buying grocery as packed food have hidden sodium, and nutrition labels can be hard to read and frustrating to understand. While they are means to help us make informed choices, they can often be confusing. Plus, serving size can be misleading, making it difficult to guide how much salt we can actually consuming. It is easy to feel overwhelmed and frustrated. While government's initiative like the Healthier Choice symbol here in Singapore is present and is very helpful, we need clearer labels and more education on how we can choose and enjoy food that are full of flavor but that are healthier for us.
So Sharon talked about choice of food, but Kampana, the first question I'm going to ask you is around impact. So sodium impact on cardiovascular disease is significant. But could you maybe give us some advice or some understanding of how would someone know if their salt intake is too high or if they've got higher risk of cardiovascular disease?
So the main thing is maybe blood pressure. So blood pressure increases. So this can be associated with salt, but not in all individuals. But for some, they are not sodium sensitive. So even you cut down salt, you don't see a reduction in blood pressure. Okay, that's something we need to, that's how the physiology acts. But otherwise, when you take too much of salt, some of the symptoms, maybe you feel bloated, puffy eyes, and so on. So that's because why sodium absorbs water and your body tries to maintain a sodium-water ratio. See, not if you take too much of sodium, your body retains the water, so you feel bloated, you feel puffy, and so on. This is something you can pay attention to and they will know, okay, I'm taking too much of sodium. Other thing which comes to sensory is you feel thirsty all the time. Okay, that is if you take too much of salt, again, same physiology, your body tries to maintain this ratio, so you feel thirsty, you want to take more water, but you may not be able to. Some of them may urinate more, but your kidney also tries to conserve to maintain this balance. So you urinate less, so what happens? Your sodium level in the blood goes high. So this in the long term might lead to hypertension. So that leads, hypertension is like a silent killer. So you don't know until you go to a GP and measure your BP, right? Otherwise you will not know. You may get slight headaches and so on. So this silent killer might lead to heart attacks when you don't really pay attention to.
So if I take on the indicator factors, how can we use innovation and science to help reduce salt?
So it's a really exciting time around sodium reduction. I know in the past, sugar reduction was the hot topic around how we can reformulate and innovate around that. But there's a lot of great research and science going on around sodium reduction now. So there's the thing about sodium reduction, it's not the same as sugar. You don't just replace sodium with one or a variety of alternatives. What you need to do is look at what the product is and develop kind of a unique solution based on that. So whether it's bakery or snacks or soups or sauces, they'll all require a different approach, but there's lots of different solutions and technologies that can be layered depending on the application. These include things like salt microstructures. So the actual structure of the salt particle can enhance the taste of saltiness if you change those structures. So a lot of them are looking at a hollow center in the middle and just kind of a structure around with that salty taste. There's other areas in the area, there's other research in the area of fermentation of ingredients to create potassium alternatives to sodium. And then there's a lot of great research in the area of umami and kokumi to bring like depth and flavor when you're lacking that sodium with innovation. So again, all of these are kind of layers to a toolkit that you can pull from depending on the application. And, you know, you can see up to 30% sodium reduction in some cases with these in like snacks and bakery. So it's an exciting time for sodium reduction. It's kind of, you know, taking over sugar reduction now from a science perspective for sure.
So we talked about the indication factors in the science, Edmund. Maybe this is a question for you. So you talked before when we were in the US last year about the space in the reformulation, and it's a good white space for Kerry to look at. Like, do you think it's going to be driven through the moral case? Are you consumers asking for it, or the business case of regulation being enforced?
Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe just before that, Simon, if you don't mind, I mean, just we were in Manila yesterday. It's some of my other Kerry colleagues around the room were in Manila, and as part of our jobs in Kerry is tasting products. So we taste products every day, it's not as glamorous as it sounds, but anyway, this is part of our job. So we were, trying to educate ourselves. Our local team in Manila were trying to educate us a little bit around the local taste of barbecue in Philippines. So we were tasting the products anyway, and one of my colleagues here in the front row said, "Oh, this one is really good. Picked out a sample, it's really good." And I'd already tasted it, and I just thought it was incredibly salty. So I just tasted it again a second time in case I just wasn't tasting it properly the first time. And I just turned and I said, like, this is incredibly salty. And he said, no, not really. And yeah, maybe a little bit. And I guess, I've been back in Europe for the last several years, and most of the products I would have been tasting on a daily basis are obviously more probably KHNI, let's say, orientated. And there's just a vast difference in the level of saltiness in the products. And it just hit me in the face in terms of the difference. So I think one of the reasons that is, and I think, and to come back to your question, Simon, is that, look, regulation, it can be an excessive intervention from time to time. There's always, let's say when there is government intervention, when there's regulation comes in, there's always anomalies. There's always things that are, that are just get caught up in the regulation, and they don't make any sense and they're fundamentally wrong. Most of the time, actually, that's only maybe 10%. It's actually maybe 70-80% okay, and 10% maybe not okay. So I guess my perspective on this thing is, look, it's progress is better than perfection. I think if we're aiming for perfection, we'll never get anywhere. Aoife talked about, let's say, sodium in terms of the complexity of replacing sodium in formulations. And in some applications, it's easier than others. In meat products, it is incredibly difficult because salt has multiple functionality in meat products, including food safety, which is pretty fundamental. So it's highly complex. I think what we are seeing at a global level is that there is going to be more and more government intervention. I would say that government intervention, and let's see what happens in the US, because there's lots of, interesting kind of noise coming from the US in the last few months. And if you look at what's happened in Canada, there's been significant push towards front of pack labeling. In Latin America, it's kind of more on warning labels around sugar, salt, fats, artificial colors, artificial preservatives. I think great, good idea. I think move in the right direction. My observation, please don't quote me on this, but my observation is just as somebody walking around stores in, let's say, Colombia, is 95% plus of the products have warning labels. Wow. And most of them have more than one warning label.
At least two.
Yeah, at least two. Maybe the official statistics. So that's not working, right? So something else has to happen, because if there's no differentiation. But I think what we've seen in the UK is that there has been a significant level of what I would call silent reformulation, where food and beverage manufacturers, rightly so, don't want to damage their brands. They don't want to lose consumers, and that's fair enough. That's the right thing for them to do. So that they don't want to draw attention to the fact that they're reducing sodium in the products. But what they are doing is behind the scenes reducing sodium bit by bit, bit by bit, bit by bit. And I frankly think that is the right thing to do. The team has been telling me about what's happening here in Singapore, a lot of transparency on the labels. Sharon, I think, mentioned it there, that you know, let's say there's more transparency there. People can understand, you know, clearly from the label, this how they feel about the product. I'm sure Singapore is going to influence other countries around the region. I'm sure if US goes in this direction, there'll be further proliferation of that, of different types of front of pack labeling. It won't be perfect, but I think progress supersedes perfection in this area, and I think more can be done, and I think more will be done in the next couple of years here.
Edmund, thanks. And if you just add on the stat that you talked about this morning, because we talked about progress over perfection. Yeah. I didn't even know this till this morning.
So the World Health Organization published a report in 2023 and showed that 1/4 of the world's population is living in a country where there is some sort of mandated regulation around sodium. So whether that's that they have to declare sodium on pack, or there are certain thresholds for certain products, but 1/4 of the world living in a country that has that. So it really is, you know, whether we see it directly on front of pack or not, there is a lot of regulation in this space, and as Edmund said, it's only going to grow.
Yeah, I think that piece that Edmund said, we were all surprised at actually how high that number was already in terms of progress. Oliver, I'd say a change in the global piece. Let's talk to SEA for the moment. I'm married to a Filipino who uses fish sauce and salt and doesn't realize they both have it in. So just talk about the food and how to reduce salt without impacting taste through cooking and ingredient technology.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's sort of two avenues for me here in terms of there's a salt reduction, and then there's maybe a dietary functionality that reduces the effects of salt as well. That's also possible. So you can kind of pair these two things up. I think salt reduction ultimately is a very tricky question, especially you touched on sort of like cultural palates, that each region will not even necessarily have a certain salt threshold, but it can even be the style of salt that's introduced to the diet. So for example, bagong or fish sauce? Both. Or yeah, okay. Both. Because like Filipinos tend to eat more of like a fermented fish paste, whereas like sort of Thai fish sauce would have a different sort of salt delivery. But everybody has, especially within Asia, I think, a sort of unique salt delivery mechanism. And then now we've layered on top of that sort of westernized global salt, like just kosher salt. And then there's the relatively new phenomenon of MSG or chicken bouillon stock powder or whatever. That's been, let's say, heavily taken up by particularly Southeast Asia. These are things that ultimately you're looking at something where salt reduction for a lot of people tends to indicate a reduction in flavor. It's not necessarily the case. I think we do season over threshold largely, especially for packaged products. In general, they're seasoned over what I would call like the flavor maximization threshold. So say something is like 2% salt is what maximizes your tongue perception of the flavors with that food. They might still season at 4% salt just because the cultural palate of the consumer base is I like salty food. Malaysia is like very salty, sweet palate, very spicy palate, like very tuned up notes in the cultural palate. So for different marketplaces, there are different things. I feel like the real mechanism for chefs in this space is to have sort of a choose your own adventure salt framework. So like you do a basic seasoning and you allow, which is popular in Asia anyways, you allow people to have soy sauce or hoisin on the table or whatever their preferred salt mechanism is. That's not going to stop people from oversalting. But ultimately, especially from an economic perspective, if people will not come to your restaurant because they find your food bland, it's a little bit difficult to tell people to reduce more salt, right? The second factor that hasn't been touched on, but I feel like is really relevant is if you have a good nutritional profile in your food and you have a good amount of anti-inflammatories in your food, you're not actually reducing the amount of salt necessarily, but you're reducing the effectiveness of the salt in terms of inducing hypertension or blood problems, which would be like, okay, so you have a turmeric and black pepper combination in the meal somewhere, or even there's different dietary mechanisms, but you can start with leafy greens and it like slows down digestion and uptake. So there's ways in which we can sort of curb the overall impact of the salt, as well as ways we can reduce salt. And I think it's important to recognize both of those and kind of combine them for the best case. Yeah.
Thanks, Oliver. And Julia, we talk about consumers of the future. We've had previous conversations around people wanting to have better taste experiences or bigger impact in their food. We've had years of oversaturation of salt. What do you think that's going to look like in terms of the future consumer?
It's such an interesting question, because as I was thinking about it and listening kind to the industry experts, we've really backed ourselves into a corner, haven't we? Right? It's a double bind. We want to deliver to the customer. The customer wants salt, so we deliver salt. And we've kind of upping the game and upping the ante. And to use game theory, this is mutually assured destruction, right? So we keep going there. And so what happens if you look at game theory again, you keep having to come back to the table with new ideas. So we heard from Aoife in terms of how formulation and food science is happening. We heard from Oliver in terms of what we can do on the table. But as a futurist, I'm really looking at what other systems can we put into place that helps deliver that delight and sensorial needs from salt, but without salt, right? And I do a lot of kind of connecting the dots, and I'm connecting it to the world and the era of simulation that we live right now. We can simulate so many things. Can we simulate salt? Can we simulate salt in something that has low sodium? And as I was doing this research, I came across this spoon that's just been released in Japan that can increase the salt flavor in your mouth by 1.5 times. So you don't have to have physical salt in the product, but when you use the spoon to eat it, it will simulate the salt satisfaction. That spoon is not far off. I'm going to Japan in June, and I'll be able to buy it at Tokyo Hands. It's not expensive. It's 200,000 yen. So that there are real, we can look at 200,000 yen. We can look at salt as part of a system of sensory rather than nutrition. And then we can find new ways to break through this mutually assured destruction. And I think that's where, the challenge I have for food companies and food brands is really to see, yes, your main product is that, but also think about the experience you give to people. Because ultimately, that's what food is for, right? That's why they would go to you, and that's why they would want to partake in the type of foods that you can deliver. And in that experience, we've got a lot of room for imagination on how we can deliver on satisfaction.
Thanks, Angelia, and thanks to the panel. Whether you've joined us live here in Singapore or the hundreds that have joined us on the digital live feed, it's been an absolute pleasure to welcome you, and a very big happy birthday to the KHNI on your 10th anniversary. Thank you to Aoife, to Edmund, to Oliver, to Angelia and Kalpana for joining us here for the session.